Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tales from the Post. We have our first lady vet in the studio today, a Miss Kim Piesik. She's a retired Master Sergeant, one of the last of the Women's Air Force, correct?
Well, there's some controversy about that. We were told in 1974 that we were airmen. We were no longer WAF, that the force had incorporated women into the regular force. But if you Google it and talking to some other women veterans, it was actually 1976 that they changed the designation. But when I was in the exchange at the BX at Lackland buying a ring during basic training, they said I was buying one of the last two WAF rings. So who knows? Maybe it was a plan initially and got changed.
What's a
You never know
two-year
with the government.
two-year
So roughly
discrepancy?
that time, yeah.
So, do you have any family that served in the military prior to you?
Lots of family. My grandfather, my father. After I went into the military, several of my brothers went in. We have quite a few family members in the military in all branches. We covered them all.
All of them: Korean War, World War II, World War One.
No, not all the wars, all the branches.
All the branches.
Yes,
Okay,
Army,
Air
Air
Force.
Force. Yep. Oh, we don't have Coast Guard. We don't have a Coastie
I don't
yet.
think they count.
So we'll have to work on them.
I don't think they. But anyway, was that your motivation for enlisting, or did you have other reasons for wanting to join?
My sister thought she's a year younger than me, and she thought she might like to be an Army nurse, and was having a hard time convincing my father to let her go in as an Army nurse, become an Army nurse. And then by the time he agreed, changed her mind and decided she didn't want to. So that was probably the first seed. But when I was 19, I was driving down the road near my home and saw a recruiting office and thought that would be interesting to just stop at the recruiting office and meet the people in there. And when I stopped, they said, sure, we'll chat, fill out this paperwork. We want you to take a little test first. So, and I always enjoyed taking multiple choice tests. So I took the ASVAB test and did well in electronics. So they not talked me into it, encouraged me to join the Navy, but it would have taken almost a year to get into their advanced electronics program. So after that, I talked to a friend who said, if you're thinking about the military, look at the Air Force, because the Air Force treats women well, and it's just a great career to go into. And I had never heard of the Air Force. I don't know why I had never heard of it, but I did talk to an Air Force recruiter and got in the next week and went into an electronics program in the Air Force then.
And the year was, what, 1974, you said?
1974. This October, it'll be 50 years since I left for basic training.
So, well, that's the tail end of Vietnam, and you don't know when the war is really going to end, right?
Except that it was interesting, when I went through basic training, there was no mention of Vietnam. It was as though it had happened, excuse me, as though it had happened centuries before. And it was very interesting that we didn't hear about best practices from Vietnam or the influence that the Vietnam War had on our training or anything like that. It was really as though it had happened at another time in another place.
Huh. That's odd, because the war hadn't ended for at least another year.
The American Legion date takes it to May of 75, and this was October of 74. But essentially, nobody was being drafted at that point. The things we read about in the paper were essentially over by then.
So the draft was over, volunteer enlistment. You went your Air Force, Women's Air Force. You also go to Lackland for basic training?
It's not a separate branch. We did go to Lackland. When I flew to Lackland, I was recruited out of the MEP station, or the AFI station in Detroit, Michigan. And the day that I left for basic training, there were 16 young men and 3 young women, all flying on Braniff Airlines, which is long gone.
Before my time.
Right. So we flew on Braniff Airlines from Detroit to San Antonio, and the 16 young men were not allowed to smoke on the plane because you could smoke on airplanes back then too. They weren't allowed to smoke on the plane. They weren't allowed to drink on the plane. They were considered military people already. The three young women were allowed to smoke, drink, do whatever we wanted to do. So already a discrepancy between how young men and women were treated at the time. And when we got to Lackland and got off the bus, the 16 young men had to stand at attention and get yelled at for the first time. The three young women were invited off of the bus, and the young men were told to carry our luggage for us, and we were still treated like proper young ladies. We got to the theater for our first briefing, and the young men had to stand at attention in the front of the theater, and we were ushered to comfortable seats. And then we went for our first meal, and we were invited to sit with the instructors while the young men had to sit at attention and learn their first square meal and all of those things. So it was really interesting that there was some animosity from the very beginning because of the differences in the ways that we were treated. So it was a very different time. Um, Young women did not fire weapons. We didn't get M16 training and basic training. We were one of the first units, one of the first flights to go through the obstacle course, because prior to about the 1st of October, women were not going through the obstacle course either. And when we went through, we weren't required to be successful on a certain number of obstacles or anything like that. We were encouraged to try them all so that they could observe and evaluate whether or not it was something that was feasible for women to do. I tried most of them. There were some that I looked at and said, no, thank you, but tried most of them. Excuse me.
So you were kind of a lab rat for all future training involving women.
Very much, because 1974 was a big time in women's lib for the civilians, and the military was trying to catch up with many of those ideas and allowing women. The career field that I was going into was ground control approach radar maintenance, or another name for it was air traffic control radar repair. And that was considered a non-traditional career field for women. So they had just opened up those slots. We didn't have uniforms that were appropriate for those kinds of things yet. In basic training, we didn't have boots. We had the low quarters, the black shoes, black lace-up shoes, which made it difficult going through the obstacle course, because we at one point had to hang on to a rope upside down and grab it with our ankles and hands. And if you don't have boots on, that's a little tough to do. And our tennis shoes that we went through it with just didn't help. We had field jackets, but they didn't have a liner and a hood like the men's uniforms, because we weren't expected to ever be out in the elements to need any protection like that. Ours had a little drawstring around the waist so they'd look cute and shapely on the young women. We didn't have, what else didn't we have? Our field uniforms were navy blue slacks and powder blue blouses with rolled up sleeves. That was our utility uniform, rather than the pickle suits that the guys were getting at the time. So even those of us going into the maintenance career field were told, we're not going to be ready to give you uniforms like that until you get to your permanent duty station. So you'll get them when you get to your permanent station. So it was a very, very different time. When we went through basic training, we had 20 hours out of the 6-week basic training, 20 hours of personal grooming by Mary Kay Cosmetics. That included oatmeal facials, pancake makeup like they used in theater.
I'm going to be lost. I personally have never used Mary Kay products.
Mary Kay
And
Cosmetics. That's right. Bring up the pink Cadillac
And I
because we're doing Mary Kay.
have no intention of ever using Mary Kay Cosmetics. So part of your training was to look pretty, according to the Air Force.
Very much so. I had my eyebrows plucked for the very first time in basic training, standing at attention. I almost passed out. It was creepy.
It's weird because I already saw the Air Force as kind of like a luxury type branch, but now you're telling me you got spa days in basic, and okay.
I was waiting for the mani-pedi next. No, there was no mani-pedi, but that I think that was coming up. But it it was interesting because at the same time they were trying to teach us to look like professional women, and that was part of the appearance of professional women at the time. So they were providing training to all of us that some of us may not have had in our civilian lives. So along with teaching personal grooming, they were teaching, no, you have to change your socks every day and change your underwear every day, and some of the things that others may not have learned in their civilian lives.
But change their underwear every day?
It was a surprise to some of the young women in our flight. Yes, it was.
Oh, because that is more understandable. Not the makeup tutorial,
right?
But hey, change your socks out because your feet's wet. Right. Hey, change your underwear out. Swamp ass exists.
Right. Every day. We're going to do this every day.
Even men do that.
Right. And some of those things were not part of the culture that some young people grew up in. So it was a challenge. But at the same time, for women, here we are trying to break through some glass ceilings and trying to be considered professional equals. And so it was a tricky balance to provide education and provide sort of a uniform opportunities for young women without keeping it too cutesy and just we didn't talk about shaming back then, but it should have been okay for people to go without makeup too. Well, the thing Lord about knows I do it now, but
the thing about a glass ceiling is it's made of glass. I mean, it's no the thing. Glass is easily breakable. You just got to have the mindset for it. Now, if concrete ceiling,
a little tougher.
Yeah, a little tougher, but it's still doable.
Right.
So this is all on basic training.
That was all basic training.
All at Lackland. Did they separate the women and men units? Like, because I know your sleeping quarters had to have been different. But was your platoon solely women, and then you had a platoon of men?
Yes, we did. Very soon after that, they started having both men and women in the same flight. That organizational unit is a flight for the Air Force, so probably similar to a platoon. We had both of our military training instructors were women, but there were some men already leading some of the basic training flights for women. There would be men drill instructors for women. So they were starting to change some of those things, but it was mostly women for us.
Now, did it change whenever you went to tech school? Was it still like that? Because the MOS you're going into was still a male-dominated field at that time.
It was.
Was it segregated as well, or was it more integrated?
The barracks, the squadrons for housing us were still segregated by sex. So there were women's squadrons and men's squadrons. But the school itself, there were a number of women in the first phase of the education, the basic electronics development course. That was a roughly 20-week course that was self-paced, and there were both men and women in that part of it. And then when I went on to the next phase that was specific to my career field, I was the only woman. I was the only woman in that class. There were 13 or 14 of us all together, but I was the only woman. And I don't think I had been the very first. I think there were one or two before me, but I was the only that I saw in that school, and certainly the only in my class.
What happened to the others? Was it like a dropout type thing, or they just put them into a different MOS?
There just hadn't been that many. They just hadn't. There were some in different AFSCs or MOSs, um, from the basic education or basic electronics development. Those women were going into different
fields,
career fields. Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you're all together for the first phase. Second
Right.
phase, they kind of branch off.
You go into your specialty. Right.
And you said there was 13 other people there with you in the second part?
In my class. Right.
13 total or 14 including
13
you?
or 14 total. I don't remember. There were 13 or 14 of us all together in my class, and I was the only woman. The others were all men.
And then what was your actual job that you were training for? And then also, where was that at? What base was that at?
That was at Keesler
Keesler
Air Force Base, and I was there for just under a year. It was from November of 74 to November of 75. It was a long course.
What was the job?
Air traffic control radar repair.
Okay.
So we were learning a lot about circuits, electronic circuits, and cathode ray tubes, and all of the different components that would go into the electronic equipment.
I know what soldering is. That's about it.
I took a micro miniature soldering techniques course, which was kind of fun. That was one of the fun classes that we did. But that was back when you did more soldering and things like that. Now it's just all components that you swap out, I'm sure.
Because you said cathode. I think it's what you said.
Cathode ray tubes.
Yep. Don't know what those are.
They probably don't even exist anymore. Who knows? Who knows?
So you were there for a full year?
Yes.
Do you have anything else you want to put in on that? Or is it just like, it was fun, move along to the first duty station? Or
Well, the best part was being on the drill team. I loved being on the drill team. That was a lot of fun, and I was captain of our drill team.
Was that segregated as well? Was it an all-women's drill team? Or
it was by squadron. So ours was the 30, nope, that was basic. I don't know. I don't remember my squadron number now.
Was it in the note you gave me?
It was on one of the pictures I gave you.
Oh, yeah, I'll have it. I'll put it. I'll make sure the editor puts it in.
Yeah, but anyway, whatever our squadron was, we had 15 or so maybe of us on the drill team, and we competed because there were many tech schools that were going to take several months. So there were quite a few of us who were going to be on base for a while. So we had time for monthly competitions for our drill teams. And it really helped me learn attention to detail at a level I had never anticipated. I could pick out a speck of dust on your uniform from 10 feet away. And it was a great exercise in paying attention to details. So it was a lot of fun. And we won a couple competitions. We weren't great, but we were right in there fighting.
Well, you looked the part.
And now I'm in the Civil Air Patrol now, and next Saturday we're going to some drill training in Punta Gorda with our cadets, and I can't wait to see how they do with their drill. So something I still enjoy.
50 years later.
50 years later, and it's still fun.
All right. So what was your AIT? You go to your first duty station. I don't know how y'all do units. I know you have your flights and squadrons and whatnot, but for Army we have number identifiers and patches and stuff. Every Air Force uniform I've ever seen, they don't have a patch. I don't know how you recognize what flight you're in. So what was your first duty station, and what was your first unit, I guess?
First duty station was Homestead here in Florida.
Okay.
Homestead Air Force Base. And I applied to go to Homestead because I met my first husband while I was in tech school, while I was at Keesler, and he was going to Homestead. So.
And in the 70s?
In the 70s.
There wasn't really anything in Homestead.
No?
Was it? Well, I'm talking about.
Besides us.
Yeah, it's like you had the Air Force Base. I think the nuclear reactor may have been around then, but besides that, like, I don't know. No one says, hey, let's go to Homestead for the weekend. Like, it was like there was really nothing down there.
Right.
You're so
There
close to
wasn't.
the Everglades.
Right. The I don't. You know what was down there? Monkey jungle, parrot jungle, orchid jungle,
I've been to
and
Monkey
the
Island, but I've never heard of Monkey Jungle.
monkey jungle, and what's the home made of concrete? The something castle. Now I don't remember the name of it.
I'm not
But anyway,
familiar.
there was a castle that a man made of coral rock. Coral castle. Coral
Okay,
castle.
I know what you're talking about now.
Yes.
He's
Yes.
got a bunch. It's not just the castle. There's a bunch of stuff all around it. Like I don't know if it's supposed to be art or
Oh,
something.
could be now. Yeah, it's been almost 50 years since I was there. So there were a few visitor kinds of things to do, but we were pretty much focused on base and getting our job done. And we'd go down to the Keys for our entertainment. But back then, excuse me, I think I'm allergic to something in here. Um, Back then, there was so much tar on the beaches that we had a dog when we were down there, and we couldn't let our dog out even along the roadside beaches as we were driving down in the Keys because there was a lot of tar. The dogs would just get full of tar. And I have talked to people now that I'm living down here, and there are some people who remember that from back then, but I never have heard an explanation. I don't know if it was from oil spills or I don't know what would have floated up to the shores that would cause that problem. But it was widespread. You'd get this black, sticky stuff. It might have been oil, not tar, but oil, but black, sticky stuff that would get all over your dog's fur, and you didn't want to walk on it even barefoot. So that made us not be able to enjoy some of the things we would have enjoyed on the way to the Keys. But my first squadron was the 1942nd Communications Squadron. And my husband was there also. He was in navigational aids for the runway. And I was there to work on the search and precision radar equipment for the air traffic controllers. But I wasn't allowed anywhere near the equipment because the guys that I worked with in my unit said that their wives were concerned that if we went out to the search radar site or the precision radar trailers, that I would be hanky-pankying with their men.
They thought you were a hussy.
They thought I was a $2 hussy. And even though I was a newlywed, my husband worked just down the hall, I had to make a point to go out to lunch or go shopping with all of these young women and let them know that if they spent 8 hours a day with Maurice, they probably wouldn't sleep with him either. So they're not that big a prize, but it was a real challenge. I was not allowed to progress, even though I had been an honor graduate from the course. I wasn't allowed to work with the equipment. And I really counted on the on-the-job training that went along with the theory that I had learned in tech school. Because we didn't work on the actual equipment in tech school. It was electronics theory that we were learning, preparing us to work with the equipment. And we were supposed to get that education at our duty station. So that didn't happen. And I fought against it for a while, but at the same time, I was a 21-year-old at that point in a two-striper and was told, you can put in a complaint with the inspector general and you go right ahead. You have every right to do that, but don't be surprised if you are very quickly transferred to Thule, Greenland. So we don't believe in retaliation, but there are a lot of things that just happened to take place after IG complaints. So I was intimidated. I was younger than many of them, and I was intimidated by their rank. I had just spent a year in training being told you respect rank and you do what you're told and you don't ask questions. And
I don't know if this will make you feel better or worse, but everything that you've been talking about Still happens. IG complaints, all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're getting orders somewhere else.
Sure.
Women, there's a thing called barracks bunny, even in the modern military, where it's married women, single women going around the barracks, and infidelity is a huge thing. Like,
Yeah.
divorce is very prevalent in the military, along with depression.
And isn't that a shame? I would have hoped that 50 years later we would see some very different things, but we see the same things in the rest of society. And unfortunately, some things improve dramatically and some things fall apart too. So,
There's certain things of human nature that's just, you can try to change, but our our primal state is always going to be there. Our
right.
subconscious, it's
10 years later, in 1984, I was down at Homestead for a deployment with my guard unit, and I stopped by the communications squadron just to see if I recognized anything or if anybody was still there. And there was a young woman who was the NCO in charge of that unit, of that part of the group that I was in. So in 10 years, many things had changed. And when I asked her questions about how she was received by the men she worked with, she looked at me as though I was speaking a foreign language. She was surprised that I had ever had problems with it. So that was encouraging. That was nice to see. But it was just, that was part of the growing pains of getting women incorporated into those non-traditional fields. So it was what it was. It was still an exciting time to be in.
well, they're in a lot of fields now. Like he said, the cameraman said earlier, I was a truck driver. We had females in our platoon.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, my lieutenant was a female. Third platoon or first platoon, a third platoon lieutenant was a female. My first platoon sergeant ever at my unit was a sergeant first class Hobte, female.
And how'd you feel about it? Did you
We
think,
just called her Mama Duck.
okay? I think most of us found our own way, as we do everywhere else in society. And and every situation is somewhat dependent on the individuals that you are surrounded by too. So it's not really a plug and play. It's going to depend on the personalities of those in that environment and all of the experiences that people bring into it. So my out was, I first applied to work in, they called it job control. So I was in sort of a dispatch office and was still in the squadron, but I was working in a closed room with radios. And if somebody needed if an air traffic controller needed their equipment adjusted, then I would call the person on call and make that happen, get them out to the radar site and get the equipment work done. So it was sort of a step back into a more traditional female role, but it didn't matter to me. It was still support of our unit, and it was still the knowledge that I had from the tech school was supportive of getting the right personnel out for the right problem.
It kind of sounds like a dream job to me, though, because you don't have anybody looking over your shoulder. You're not forced out into the crowds. There's a lot less saluting whenever you're enclosed in a little building. You tell people what to do.
Yeah, I may or may not have taken a little sewing machine in with me because I worked midnights a lot. And I may or may not have done a lot of my own reading. If I had an iPhone at the time, I'd have been playing Candy Crush or something on it probably. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad job. And it helped me learn a lot more about the military because that was the room that our squadron commander had stand up in every morning as well. So it was a way to learn a little more about my unit too. And then I cross-trained into an administrative role and worked at the personnel office on base and learned a lot there from the chief master sergeant, the E9 that I worked for in that role. So all good things, all good things. And I had some wonderful additional duties because we were at Homestead.
Oh, this is still all at Homestead.
This is all at Homestead.
How long were you at Homestead?
Just 2 years.
So you went through 3 jobs?
In 2 years. I was busy.
Okay.
I had a lot going on. I don't let moss grow under my feet.
I'm thinking, okay, we're around year 10 in your career.
No, we're just getting started. But Homestead had the what did they call it? It was a big conference center. It was a big conference center, sort of built half underground. It because they wanted to keep it very secure, and they used it for the Worldwide Commanders Conference as well as other conferences throughout the year. So every February, if you have to have a get together, you might as well do it in Florida in February. So we had a lot of 3 and 4 star generals from all over the world come into Homestead. And those of us who were younger airmen were selected to be conference drivers. So our job was this was an additional duty. So we would just be excused from our regular activities. And we would go and pick up our staff cars and spit and polish the staff cars. And that attention to detail that I picked up by being on the drill team was very helpful then. They could still smoke in the cars, so we would have to clean out the ashtrays with Q-tips every day, and you'd look for specks of lint on the seats, and they had to be sharp every day. But it was fun. And then we had the opportunity to take these 3 and 4 star generals to the golf course or to their conference or back to their barracks or wherever they were going. And it was just a very interesting opportunity. I had the chance to take a carload of full bird colonels and generals down to Isla Morada to go sail fishing.
What were you driving? Was it like a Mercedes or
Probably like a Crown Vic, something like that. I know they weren't Cadillacs. I believe they were Fords or Lincolns.
like a Lincoln Continental?
Probably that size.
I think Mercury had one too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Who made the Crown Vic?
Crown Vic was Ford.
That was Ford. And there was a Mercury counterpart to that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what.
Cougar? No, wasn't the Cougar.
But anyway, they were just big. This was mid-70s, so they were the big boat of the time. But
like a Chevrolet Caprice and Lincoln Continental.
Right, that size.
It's like a yacht on wheels.
Right. And when we were driving down to Isla Morada, we had the general who was in charge of personnel and personnel assignments, the number 1 guy for that. And
Grand Marquis. That was the Mercury one.
Yes, it was.
That was bothering me. Sorry to cut in, but whenever it comes to cars, it's like, I should know this.
And I do too. I love the cars. So we had the guy who was in charge of personnel and personnel assignments and the guy who was in charge of electronics, both in the back seat of my staff car. And they loved to ask the young airmen where we were from and what we did in the military, what we thought about the military. So I told them that I had gone from electronics to working in the personnel office in an admin function. So here's the 2 top dogs in those areas in my back seat. And they said, which one did you like best? And I...
Driving you all around.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I don't even remember what I told them, but they giggled. I probably just stammered for a few seconds. And they said, oh, we're just picking on you because. But they did. The personnel general offered me an assignment to Hawaii if I wanted to go to Hawaii. But he couldn't guarantee one for my husband. And I was about 8 weeks pregnant at the time with my first baby. And said, no, I'll stay here at Homestead. But gosh, that would be fun.
Never got anything like that. Another Air Force person I know who's totally not behind the camera got offered some pretty cool jobs, that we speculate became the base where they stood up for drone training.
Nice.
Yeah, some suits and ties stuff.
Things can happen. Things can happen.
Air Force, I hear about y'all getting other jobs all the time. No, shut up and drive. Chain down vehicles, binder them.
We had a lot of fun. So yeah, that was all at Homestead. And then I left Homestead after I had my first baby. She was born in what was called the Richard Nixon wing of Homestead Air Force Base Hospital. When Richard Nixon was president, he liked to go down to Key Biscayne. So they built a wing onto the hospital for presidential support should he ever need it. And then they changed that into the maternity section after he was no longer president.
Wasn't he like the original Gerber baby? Something like that?
Mm-mm.
No?
It was a woman.
It was?
Mm-hmm.
I heard a rumor like he was like the original Gerber baby.
He was not that cute.
I didn't say he was. I'm just saying it's a rumor.
Yeah.
I even clarified. It's a rumor.
No.
I heard it may people joking or something, but
yeah. But so in 77, the year my daughter was born, my husband took an early out that summer. The Air Force periodically would look at their numbers of first-term airmen and determine whether or not they wanted to let them get out early if they weren't planning to re-enlist, because it was just a personnel shifting sort of thing. So they offered him an early out. So he served for 3 years, and his mother was in Michigan. Both of our families were in Michigan, and she was not doing well. She had cancer. So we looked at whether or not we wanted to stay in the military. Oh, and Jimmy Carter was president then. And we had a lot of concerns about military benefits being eliminated. That's what the rumors were going around, that dependents may not have dental benefits under the Carter administration.
Well, they downsized a lot.
Yeah, that it just might not be a good career move anymore for young people. And what did we know? We were young people in our 20s. We went with rumors and propaganda. That's all we heard. So he elected to get out that summer, and then I got out after my daughter was born. So we moved back to Michigan then. So that was my 3 years of active duty.
So in between that, obviously you're raising your daughter. Yeah, I think this is the first. No, I had another guest. What was your motivation for getting back in? And did you go active, or was it reserve? Was it National Guard?
Both my husband and I really enjoyed our time in the military, and we had mixed feelings about getting out. And I don't remember who first suggested the reserve or the guard to us. But I know there had been programs called Palace Chase at the time, where you could go from active duty right into the reserve or guard and finish your obligation that way. So reserve and guard had been talked about even when we were active duty. So the two of us both went to talk to a recruiter in 78. So we got out in 77. Summer of 78, we went and talked to recruiters. And at the time, I don't know if it was the whole recruiting office or this particular recruiter, said we couldn't both go into the Air Force Reserve or the Air National Guard. We had to each go into a different one. I don't know why. It didn't make any sense then, still doesn't. We found that wasn't really the case. So my husband went into the Air National Guard, and I went into the Air Force Reserve. And they both had units at Selfridge Air National Guard Base. So it just meant we were on different drill weekends, which worked out well anyway. And so he became a firefighter in the Air Guard, and I went into work for the group commander as an administrative person, because that was the last career field I'd been in. So I did that for about a year and a half. When I had my second child, he was not interested in bottles. So I had a choice between staying in the military and not feeding him the way I chose to, or getting out. So I chose to get out at the time. So I had about just over a year and a half in the reserve. And then less than a year after that, I went into the Guard, because we found out that it was not true that we couldn't both be in the Guard. So I did join the Guard. And my husband got out because of his civilian work responsibilities. So I stayed in the Guard. And then I stayed in the Guard for 17 years. And that's how I was able to complete my retirement, because I had a total of 20 years then.
And this is the Michigan Air National Guard?
Michigan Air National Guard. Most states have both a reserve component and a guard component. They're both part-time components of the active duty service. So the Marine Corps, for example, has a Marine Corps Reserve. Navy has a reserve. Neither of them have guard units. Army and Air Force both have National Guard units. And then the Air National Guard is, of course, the Air Force's version. And they have a dual response, both federal, they have a federal obligation and a state obligation. So they can be activated by the state governor as well as the federal government.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought National Guard units were strictly within the confines of the state because the state's the one that pays their check.
No, the state pays some things, but it's really the federal government that pays quite a bit. And you can go federal for training. Every time you get a set of orders, they can come up differently.
Your active status, then the federal pays, and then it's like your active time counts towards your retirement. And
there was a time when guard units would stay in state, and depending on what their mission was, in fact, our Michigan Air National Guard, one of our flying units was considered stay at home, and the other was a traveling unit.
I guess I should have clarified it. I thought only the state could activate the National Guard.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, the state can, but federal government can also. And when you look at who's been serving in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and many of the more recent events, more recent because I'm looking at 1970s as being not that long ago, but you see a lot of Guard and Reserve units that are deployed for a year and go and serve for that amount of time. And a lot of them that are on a rotating basis, and they're activated for 90 days, come home, rest up, and go back to it. So there's been a heavy use of Guard and Reserve units for military activities, which makes sense. Well, use them when you need them, and then let them go work at Kmart in between, or whatever else we're doing.
Well, we replaced I think it was a reserve unit that we replaced, and then a National Guard. Well, I say National Guard unit. It was one unit, but it was composed of an amalgamation of different units. Because it's like, I want to go, and they just kind of take all the volunteers and put them into one unit. And then...
My son did that. My son went to Iraq on 3 different deployments, and only one of them was with our Selfridge folks.
We didn't even talk if you had deployments or not.
Well, the time I was active duty, I didn't deploy.
Because no Bosnia, no Desert Storm?
No, there was nothing. It was 75 to 77. So we were taking a little breather. We didn't have anything real crazy going on in that time period.
During your National Guard time, nothing?
No, I really sort of got in the sweet spot. In 95, we were going to Kunsan Air Force Base in Korea, just about the same time as the Patriot missiles were heading over there. So we were told, pack a few extra tighty-whities because you may not be coming back, who knows. And it turned out to be nothing. We didn't have any problems at all. So that was probably my one brush with maybe there'll be something exciting. And then Desert Shield and Desert Storm
it was 91?
took place.
Right?
90.
91?
Well, 90 was Desert Shield because I was in tech school to be a medic. I had a couple breaks in service, but I had one break between 85 and 90 when my kids were young and I really needed to spend some more time at home. And then in 90, I was able to go back in. They had expanded the size of our medical unit at Selfridge, and I was finally able to get a job as a medic, which is what I really wanted 16 years before that when I went active duty. So
is that your 4th job?
It was actually my 5th.
Because I had one more finger I could use.
Yeah, because in between there, I was ground control approach, then admin, then medical admin when I went into the Guard. They let me
Okay,
cross-train into medical admin, and I didn't have to go away to a tech school. I could do that with just the career development courses. And then, because I was stuck in a staff sergeant slot and wasn't going to be able to make rank, I was invited to go over to social actions and work as an drug and alcohol abuse specialist. So that was number 4.
at this
That's
point,
right.
I'm a professional.
Yeah. And that was a kind of a funny spot for a weekend warrior, because I was at the Navy Club with everybody else on Friday night, and then Saturday morning teaching the classes of here's how you know when enough is enough. But that was an interesting slot, and I was able to make tech sergeant in that slot. And then I took that was before my 5-year break. And then I got out in 85 and went back in 90 into a medic position, and I was at Lackland Air Force Base for my clinicals. I went to Shepherd Air Force Base for my medic training, went down to Lackland for clinicals, which was the most phenomenal 2-month clinical experience you could imagine. But while we were there, we were called into a room and told, this is the end of July, things are starting to happen. You may not finish your clinicals. If you do finish your clinicals, you may go directly back to your base to be deployed. You may be activated to stay here to backfill for some of our folks who are being deployed. So it was looking like things could happen, that we could be part of that. As it turned out, I went back in September, finished my clinicals, got up to Michigan in September, and our unit said, be prepared, we may be deployed. And we learned after the fact that we would have been the second round of folks to go in, but because the original plan was to have 90-day rotations. But President Bush decided no rotation of troops, whoever goes stays. And I just learned about a month ago that one of the reasons for that is that they were finding that active duty pilots were more likely to get shot down during their first, I forget what I don't know if it was a 30-day period, I don't remember what, first 10 sorties. First 10 sorties. Okay. So they were finding that the pilots who stuck around, if they made it past 10, they were much more likely to survive and come home. So the motivation to pull them out and put new guys in was really changed. So, long story short, we didn't know until afterwards that we would have gone in November. But back at home, we were making plans then for what we could do to support the war effort. And at first we were anxious. Oh no, there hasn't been anything big going on since Vietnam. We're a little concerned. We were told, have your Christmas celebrations early. We don't know what's going to happen. We could get a call and you've got to go tomorrow. So we were all getting prepared. We were anxious. And then the holidays came and went. We said, okay, we haven't gotten called yet. Why haven't we gotten called? We're good enough to get called. We could do a really good job. Why aren't we going? And it was interesting to see how the whole dynamic changed. And we were feeling like the bridesmaids and not the brides. And we were ready to go. So we had made arrangements then in the meantime to go to someplace in New Mexico. Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. We were going to go there in February and backfill for some folks in Holloman so they could go on whatever deployment they were doing. And then we were told we don't have enough aircraft left in the States to get you down to Holloman. So you stay in Michigan and just do your training in Michigan. So we put together 2 weeks of training just to do at our home base, and literally went into the break room and watched the war on TV.
So we were talking about your unit's orders kind of getting canceled because of the pilot. They decided pilots were dying too soon, so they kept them over there longer. Do you want to expand on that, or do you want to move on to the next section?
So we watched the war on TV, literally watched the war on TV. But we had many other opportunities after that to be supportive. We had smaller units that deployed that took part in Desert Storm. And then as the years went on, of course, the needs changed. I had wonderful, wonderful deployments for training, and as a medic, I was able to go on deployments to support other units. So I went to Hawaii twice in support of our security forces, went to Korea, Panama, went to a lot of different places, which was really nice. Very, very great opportunities.
And being a doc, you're protected. Everybody takes a shot at you personal. Like you shoot at doc, we're going to delete your grid square. Like you do not mess with our docs.
The medics, the cooks, and the cops all got along well together.
Okay, together. I was going to say, we don't really get along with MPs too much.
No.
I was a truck driver. They hated us.
The medics did. The medics, the cooks, and the cops all played pretty well together. And we had some great opportunities together. And that was pretty much it. I retired in 2001.
Out of Panama?
No, out of Selfridge Air National Guard Base in Michigan.
Okay.
And that was, I had married my second husband in 99. So we had been married for about a year and a half. And I was just getting to the point where I was ready to do some other things with my career and spend more time with my husband. And it was really important to me. I had made Master Sergeant by that point, E7. And throughout my career, I realized that there were people who hung on to their positions to an extent that it made it difficult for younger airmen to make rank. So I had my opportunities. I had a wonderful career. I could have stayed in longer. I could have done some more things. I would have had a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt that it was important because of the way the Air National Guard gives rank. You have to recruit into a specific slot that comes with a specific rank ceiling to it. So it was important to make room for some other troops that were coming up, and they wanted to make rank, and I didn't blame them. So that was just good timing. It was spring of 2001, before the September 11th events. When September 11th did take place, I called my recruiter and asked if I should be prepared to come back in if they needed more medics. And she said, when we need middle-aged, overweight women, we'll give you a call. So she was a dear friend, and I took it with the spirit intended. But that was a time for the next generation to take over. My son was in the same Air National Guard unit at that point.
Following Mama's footsteps?
Following in Mama's footsteps, although he was an F-16 crew chief. So on September 11th, they called him, and he laced up his boots and was activated then for the next year. So it was time for that next generation to take over.
All right. Well, usually I ask your motivation for getting out, but it looks like you just laid it all out for me.
That was it.
I have started this new thing where I've asked all these new, any guests that I've had on, whether they're young, old, male, female, doesn't matter. What is some knowledge that you want, like you wish that you had whenever you enlisted, or knowledge that you've attained that you want to pass down to the next generation of veterans, whether it's sailors, soldiers, Marines, cadets, airmen?
I think military retirement is such a wonderful, wonderful gift that anyone who is in the military and can hang in there and cobble together 20 years of good service in whichever units, active, reserve, guard, the military retirement benefits are wonderful, and they certainly make up for those of us who didn't plan well enough for retirement. It's a wonderful way to go into retirement. So I would encourage people who are in to stay in if they're able to, whether it's in a guard, reserve capacity, or active duty, and get the most out of the military experience. There are those who don't have the same wonderful memories that I have, but there are always ways around that. Changing careers, changing units, whatever. If you can stick it out, it's a great benefit.
Embrace the suck now, because your future self well, thank you.
Yes. Yes.
And the second part to that is, what misconception does the civilian population have that you wish was corrected, or any information that you have that you'd want to pass along to the civilians, I guess, those that haven't experienced military service?
And so few civilians have experienced military service that there really are a lot of misconceptions. And I think one that's very important is that the military can absolutely be a career, and it can be a very appropriate career choice for many of our young people. It's an amazing transition into adulthood for young people, very well supported,
Disciplined.
disciplined. My little ADHD brain really needed the organization and really needed that just that organization, I guess is the best word. Just knowing that there were regulations and standards, and
We're not
here's
all infantry.
right, right,
A lot of people think, okay, you join the Army or the Marines, it's like you shoot people. No,
right,
that's not true.
right.
It's a community in itself. You have doctors, you have lawyers, you have
Yes,
cops, cooks, truck drivers. You have, yes, you have pilots, you have infantry, you have tankers. There's so many jobs out there. If you have a passion about something, even band,
right.
right? I
Oh,
believe
absolutely,
even
absolutely.
if you like music
Right.
and you play a certain instrument, each
Photography,
photography is
photography. There are so many things in the arts that are important for the military. Anything we need on civilian side, we need in the military as well. And it can be an absolutely wonderful career choice for a young person. And the benefits at retirement then are that 20 years can go by in real quick, real
and you
quick.
make some great friends along the way.
It's the military connection is fascinating to me. Anybody, when you talked about meeting our cameraman, the fact that he was in the military just stepped things up a notch right from there. Within my own family, I mentioned I'm the oldest of 10. There are four of us who served in the military,
And you're
and
probably closer than the rest.
it's there's a little shade of difference in our relationship. We just have a little different understanding, a little different camaraderie, and not to take anything away from those who didn't serve, but it is a little extra layer that's beautiful and treasured. And same thing with my nieces and nephews and my son and the other family members who've served. It's wonderful.
And it spans generations too. I'm an Iraq war vet. I have friends that are Bosnian vets, Vietnam vets, Korean war vets, people that are my grandparents' age that I consider very close friends of mine. And it's because we share that certain bond
Sure.
that the civilian population doesn't have. A lot of
Sure.
people, they'll leave a job and they may keep in contact with a friend from that
Right.
job, but more often than not, they kind of just drift away.
Yeah.
Where military, you kind of stay connected in a sense.
Right.
But that sounds like a great point to end on. Once again, this has been retired Master Sergeant Kim Piesik. As always, I've been your host, Shaggy. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.